Hi, welcome to this fresh teaching from Foundation Church Belfast. My name is David. I'm the pastor of Foundation Church, and we're continuing in our series through the book of Ezra, coming to Ezra chapter 8 in our series called Restoration. And today the theme we're looking at is the subject of trust. Trust in God. Something that we might reference and sing about and talk about as Christians, as believers in Jesus quite a bit. But you know, trust in God is part of the basic formula for what it is to be a Christian. In fact, any relationship is built on trust. The stronger the trust, the stronger the relationship. When the trust is broken, the relationship is damaged or destroyed. But the more trust we have in a relationship, the more power that relationship has, the more resilience it has, the more enriching it is for each person. And so therefore with God as well, the more we trust God as believers in Jesus, the more our lives will be enriched, the more we will demonstrate the fruit of trusting in God. Even it could be said that the more remarkable and influential our lives can be, the more that we trust God. And that applies to our church as well. The more we trust God, the more he can use us for his kingdom purposes. And so today we're going to be looking at this theme of trust. And we're going to be looking, first of all, at the basis of that trust. Secondly, the nature of trust. And thirdly, the results. What does it produce? So firstly, just now in this video, the basis of trust. And if you want to read along, the link will be in the video notes just now. But do pause the video. If you haven't already read Ezra chapter 8, read it now. It gives you a great overview of where we're heading today and what we're talking about. So anyway, the basis of our trust. And in many ways, this is building on what we've already been learning about God throughout this whole series. We have seen throughout Ezra that God stirs his people by his Spirit. He equips them with all the resources that they need to restore worship and to gather again as his people. He forms them into restoration community. And so what we see here is further basis for our trust in God. And one of the interesting metaphors that we see Ezra using here in this passage is the idea, the image of the hand of God. The hand of God. It's a very vivid image. And God doesn't actually have hands. God is spirit. The technical term is an anthropomorphism, sort of a human characteristic to explain and understand something of God. And so the hand of God is this very vivid image, and it explains to us, helps us understand what God is and what he does, what he achieves with his hands. And so we will learn about the basis of our trust in God the more we understand how Ezra uses this metaphor of the hand of God. First of all, a bit of background if you're new into this teaching. We've just met Ezra in the last chapter, Ezra chapter 7. He enters the scene and he is chosen by the Persian king to lead the second wave of exiles from Babylon, now under control of the Persian authorities, and to lead them back to Jerusalem to continue God's work of restoration of the temple, of worship, and of Israelite society in general. And we saw last week that Ezra is a man who passionately pursues God. It says he put his heart into learning about God through his word, doing his word, and then teaching it to other people. And then we saw subsequent to that how he was influential in the very high levels of Persian society. He was influential in the royal courts. And it was that influence that enabled the king to identify him and send him back, call him to lead. And we saw how Ezra was a man full of courage as well. He applied courage to his calling, and he had faith in God. He trusted God. And so we'll see more of that today in this section. So chapter 8 is all about the details of the return of the second wave back to Jerusalem. And we're met with a problem here. He gathers the team just as they're about to leave, probably just something around 1,000 people, not a lot compared to the first wave back in Ezra chapter 1. There's thousands of them, just maybe up to 1,000 here. And he gathered the team, he did a head count, he saw all the families and the leaders of the various tribes, but he realized that the entire community was lacking Levites. They were lacking a key group of people that were going to help make their mission successful. We'll see why that is a bit later on. But we see in verse 18 the first reference to the hand of God. He says, the good hand of our God was on us. The good hand of our God was on us. God's hand is good. That's the first basis of our trust. God's hand is good. It's very important that we understand this because it's not always immediately obvious that God's hand upon his people in his dealings with them is always good. Sometimes we may understand that with our minds, but we forget it in our inner being. We allow ourselves to think that the hand of God, his actions, his purposes towards us are hard. He is heavy on us. He's a disciplinary God. And maybe sometimes he is. But God's hand, as we see here, and this will flesh out as we go on, God's hand is overwhelmingly good towards his people. Is overwhelmingly good. He is a fatherly God. He is a loving God, and his hand upon them is good. I remember when my daughter, Eliza, was just a few weeks old, and as all babies do, she would cry, particularly at night time when you would try and settle her for sleep. She would be very distressed. And sometimes I found this when I went into her room, rather than lifting her up and trying to swing her back to sleep or something, I would simply place my hand upon her back. And many times when I did that, she stopped crying instantly. It was great. She felt my hand upon her and immediately she settled. And I can only assume that she was crying because she felt alone. She felt abandoned. It wasn't because she was hungry. It wasn't because she was cold. She was fine, but she felt alone. And so she felt that my hand upon her was a good hand. It was a comforting presence. It sort of communicated beyond words. It said, you're not alone. At a very basic level, you're loved. This hand is good. I'm with you. Everything is okay. And at that moment, when she felt that hand upon her, fear and distress just faded away. You see, God's hand is a good hand upon his people. He is a good God, and his hand brings good. So that's the first use of the hand of God. God's hand is a good hand. But we see that idea appearing again in verse 22. Fast forward a bit, it's a very risky trip that this second wave of exiles are about to take. But yet, for one reason or another, Ezra refuses an armed guard, an armed attachment to join with the restoration community on their route back. Why did he do that? Well, turns out he actually told the king of Persia, look, the hand of our God is on us for good, on all who seek him. The hand of our God is for good, for all who seek him. His hand is for good. We've just seen how his hand is good. He's a good God, but it's for good. It flows one to the other. A good God does good things, good actions, comes from his character. That's why we can trust him. It's the basis of our trust. Many years later, the Apostle Paul picks up this idea, this theme. He says, I am sure of this, that he who began, what? A good work in you will carry it through to completion on the day of Jesus Christ. He began a good work in you. He will carry it on. He will finish it off. Likewise, he picks up the theme in Ephesians 2. The Apostle Paul says, we, the people of God, are his workmanship. He's been working on us, created in Christ Jesus for good works for us to do. His works are good. He creates us and calls us to do good works for him. Yes, we are required to use courage and boldness from our perspective, sacrificing things, our time, our money, and all that. Yes, absolutely. But his work in us is good. His work with us is good because he is good. So the third use then of this term, the hand of God, we see later on again in the story in verse 31. They arrived in Jerusalem. It took them about 4 months, but they arrived. And he says, Ezra writes in verse 31, the hand, again, of our God was on us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy. The hand of our God was on us, and we see that as he delivered us from the hands of our enemies. His hand is victorious. It is strong. It is stronger than the hands of the enemy. He overcomes. He overpowers evil, as Ezra says. Why should we trust God? Because he delivers his people. His hand delivers. This is the standout feature of his hand upon us. And of course, we see this in the gospel of Jesus most clearly. Through Jesus, the hand of God shows his deliverance, his victory most clearly in anything of his interactions with us. Sin and death and the devil are all taken down. They are all overpowered. They are all overcome through Jesus' work on the cross and through his resurrection. You know, through Jesus and because of Jesus, the Apostle Paul again can cry out, death is swallowed up in victory. Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting? Because the hand of God has delivered us from death in Jesus Christ. He goes on to say in another section, God made us alive with him, that is with Jesus, having forgiven our sins, victorious over sin. He disarmed the spiritually dark rulers and authorities, putting them to shame, triumphing over them in the cross. So there we have it, all for you, all through Jesus. Sin is destroyed, death is swallowed up, Satan is disarmed and triumphed over through the cross of Jesus Christ. Folks, this is the basis of our trust. This is why we trust the good hand that does good things, that delivers us. When we look at Jesus and we see these things come to us most clearly and obviously, look at the cross. Look at the empty grave. It's empty because he rose. And it's all for you. When you see them, you will see the hand of God upon you. You will see the deliverance. You will see the goodness. You'll see the good works that he does. That is the basis of our trust.